Okay. Alright, so last week we had positive reinforcement. This week we're going to be going over negative reinforcement. We're going to be using applied behavior analysis by Cooper, Heron, and Heward one more time. And we're going to be on pages 292 to 294, which is chapter 12. I'm going to start by stating the definition of negative reinforcement, also the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment, and give a brief example of how you can use negative reinforcement with someone with autism or developmental disability in a classroom. So I'm going to start by stating negative reinforcement definition. A negative reinforcement contingency is one in which the occurrence of a response produces the removal, termination, reduction, or postponement of a stimulus, which leads to an increase in the future occurrence of that response. And now we're going to do negative reinforcement versus punishment. Negative reinforcement is sometimes confused with punishment for two reasons. First, because the lay term for positive reinforcement is reward, people mistakenly consider negative reinforcement as the technical term for the opposite of reinforcement, punishment. The terms positive and negative, however, do not refer to good and bad, but to the type of stimulus change that follows behavior. A second source of confusion stems from the fact that the stimuli involved in both negative reinforcement and punishment are considered aversive to most people. Although it is true that the same stimulus may serve as negative reinforcer in one context and as a punisher in different contexts, both the nature of the stimulus change and its effect on behavior differ. So I'm going to use the four-term contingency to discuss an example with negative reinforcement. I have one person I work with that receives detentions often because he speaks out in class. Everybody, including himself, has the option to write a letter apologizing to the teacher for talking out in class, in which they can skip their detention that day. So, the establishing operant, the student has a detention for talking out that day. He has the option given by the teacher to write a letter apologizing. His response will be to write that letter, and the reinforcer will be no detention that day. So that's just my own example of negative reinforcement. Now, I don't want my example to be confused with punishment because I mentioned detention. Rather, negative reinforcement as an escape contingency for the current situation. The student hands in the letter of apology so that he can escape the situation of a detention.